Tower of Dogs by H. Miller. Chapter 1. Rome. If the orphan looked any worse, no one would want it. The single lookout over the southern border was more of a foreboding crypt than a tower, half sunken and leaning precariously toward the river below. Rotted wood was little support in place of century-old carved stone. The once tide-changing location was a shamble of its past self. Abandoned, then forgotten, then torn apart and left on a crutch like a lame street beggar. Yet this was the fourth's greatest treasure. This was the reason why Rome dragged himself out of his bunk and was standing in a cold, misty rain instead of treating himself to an extra bowl of porridge by the fire. All because Liam decided that today was the day. "I wish summer would hurry up and get here," Liam grumbled before releasing a loud sneeze. He shivered against the chill that came with wet clothes, tucking and untucking his arms with impatience. His hazel-green eyes flashed up at the tower, sharply noting every movement under his curly red fringe. "What's taking them so long?" he said under his breath, a fine haze pouring out with each word. Rome squinted up at the tower's top floor, half open to the sky. The space was still as empty as it had been when they arrived. Then, the rain had been light and their hopes higher, but the prolonged response dragged the possibility for a quick transaction through the mud. "We could just kick them out," Rome suggested. Liam snorted, the corner of his lips turning up on his freckle-dense face. "You just want to barge in and tear the place apart. It doesn't need any more help from me." The longer Rome looked at the orphan, the more it seemed like it wasn't worth the effort. He was supposed to be spending his 17th year preparing for a job up north, not fighting for a pile of rocks. Rome bit the inside of his cheek and shook his last thought away. It wasn't all Liam's fault. Rome wanted the tower as much as the next guy. He was tired of sleeping in a large room with 30 other boys who rarely bathed. They decided they would one day live in the tower themselves, and that was a promise forged in blood and dirt years before. It used to be a tradition in the Fourth to pass the claim of the tower on to a new group each summer. As the needs of the tower itself went ignored, so did the annual exchange. Groups like the one occupying it now were able to hold on to the tower for 3 or 4 more years before someone Groups like the one occupying it now were able to hold on to the tower for 3 or more years before someone as pig-headed as Liam decided to take it. And if Liam was pig-headed, then Rome was dumber than a rock for standing with him. Yet, somehow, 2 scrawny boys who started out throwing dirt at each other turned into a pair of respectable young men. At least when it came down to a fist fight. Fighting for the tower was one of the few times the boys were encouraged to exchange blows in the Fourth. Liam continued to watch every port visible from the tower's north side. Despite his aversion to the cold and wet, he stood unyielding as he waited for a response from inside. A year ago, his cousin Goose swiped his chance to claim the tower, leaving him with a bloody nose and a sore ego. Revenge was almost as important as winning this time. "What are you looking at me for?" Liam asked, suddenly catching Rome's gaze. Just wondering if your beak really isn't as big as Goose's. It's hard to tell from this angle." The insult was enough to ignite him without even mentioning his cousin's name. "Say that again, and you're not getting into my tower." A snort exploded out of Rome, causing Liam's face to turn almost as red as his hair. He shoved Rome aside and marched a few paces forward, splashing into the puddle before him. "Aha! We didn't give you the okay," shouted a voice from the tower. "Goose, get down here so we can finish this." Liam's cousin leaned through the hole in the wall that served as a window halfway up the tower, displaying a cocky grin on his face as he swept his straight red hair aside. "Rules of war, no beacon, no fight." He waved his hand nonchalantly. "Go back to your spot and wait like a good little boy." Liam growled out a curse and stomped back to Rome's side, the puddle's surface laughing up at him. "I hate him," Liam said, crossing his arms and scrunching his shoulders. His hood had fallen back, and the rain soaked his curls, sticking them to his face. The cousins were almost mirror images, both tall, lean, freckled, and pale enough to burn in the sunlight. Liam's saving grace was he had his mother's nose and eyes, while Goose sported his bill with unwarranted posterity. Rome had been the taller one when they first met, but his growth spurt stopped a few inches short. In exchange, he put on more muscle, which was perfect for giving and taking punches. He hadn't quite grown into his father's jacket yet, the shoulders and arms having ample room. The red elk skin was heavy enough without absorbing every raindrop that fell on it, and the fur lining was making him warm. Too warm. He dropped the jacket to his elbows, earning another glare from Liam. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. You told me not to do anything until we got the signal," Rome said, leaning his head back to let the cool rain wash over his olive skin and soak his dark hair. He did enjoy teasing Liam, but the rain was starting to wash away his patience. As he tilted his head back, he glanced at the top of the tower. No signal from the occupants. He moved his eyes down to the base, where a single figure stood in its shadow. Pressed close against the stone wall was an oversized hood and jacket. Their third member, Onyx. No movement from him. No signal. "You know they're doing this just to piss you off," Rome said, running his hand back through his hair. He let it grow over the winter, and it was long enough to start getting into his eyes. "That was obvious," Liam said, squinting and drawing Rome's attention to the tower. Onyx had moved. Assuming he went around to the back, Rome yanked his jacket back on. "About time." "No, that's not the signal," Liam argued, looking between Rome and the spot where Onyx once stood. "It's good enough for me." Before Liam could stop him, Rome rushed forward, clearing their barrier in one step. He ran straight for the door, bracing his body for impact. Wood or flesh. The impact came, but it was stone. Large rocks fell from the top of the tower, pelting him from above. Behind the curtain of stone, Rome saw a black hood looming over the upper wall. For a moment, the shadowed face looked like Onyx, but he lost track of the figure as a piece of rock knocked into the side of his head. He raised his arms and rolled to the side, taking refuge near the wall. The angle of the tower provided him shelter from another direct strike. "Ksa!" he cursed. Goose was a bastard, sure enough, but Rome didn't expect he'd pull a defense like that. The smaller rocks that stuck true scuffed up his knuckles. His back and shoulders would be bruised, but he avoided the worst of it. A drop of rain trickled down his cheek to his lips, and he tasted blood. The rock that knocked against his head must have broken his skin. "Rome, are you okay?" Liam shouted. He crossed the barrier as well, but stayed out of range of the falling rocks. "Yeah, I'm fine," Rome replied. He wasn't hurt enough to run away, and now he had even more reason to lay Goose out flat. His heart raced, waiting for a gap in the falling rocks. Before he lost the adrenaline, he zipped along the edge of the wall to the door and slammed his shoulders into it. The splintered boards gave way and crashed down with him. Rome scrambled to his feet, slipping on the wood, and bowled over the closest body. Beacon or no, the fight started. He wrestled to pin his enemy down. After having rocks dumped on him, Rome had every right to draw blood. But the target he sat on wasn't Goose. It was one of the Moore brothers, who occupied the tower with him. Before he could place the boys' names, his legs were pulled out from under him. He twisted around, too late, smacking his chin against the ground as he was dragged back toward the door. His attacker and victim joined together, each taking a leg while sharing a snicker between them. They dragged Rome out of the tower before the light revealed the faces of Ethan and Dylan Moore. The twin brothers had tan skin, short black hair, and narrow eyes, which made them look like they were always laughing. The only way to tell them apart was a miracle that gave Ethan a few extra pounds to throw around. Picking a fight with either of them meant that you had to watch your back for the other. "You broke the code, and our door," said Dylan. They dumped Rome's body outside the threshold in a large standing puddle, the water immediately soaking through every layer of his clothing, chilling even his bones. Beside him were some of the rocks that fell earlier. Rome grabbed one and threw, hitting Dylan in the thigh. "Hey, no weapons! You were the ones who dumped them on me." "No, we didn't," Ethan said, raising his fist. Rome lunged at Ethan and wrapped his arms around his legs, pushing him down into the mud. Ethan's fists pounded against his arms. Rome took one hit to the shoulder as he drew his hands back and threw a solid punch into Ethan's cheekbone. Dylan shouted and kicked at Rome's stomach. A wave of water rushed out in front of his foot, spraying dirt as it went. Before he drew back his legs for another attack, Onyx knocked into him from behind, sending him face first into the puddle. "Where have you been? You almost missed the whole fight," Rome said through gritted teeth. Onyx's reply was a single blink as he focused on restraining his captive. With one man down, Rome dropped all of his weight onto Ethan and pinned his hands across his thick chest. They stilled for a moment, a silent countdown running through Rome's head. Dylan spat mud and rainwater. "I think they got us." "Yeah," said Ethan. "I was hoping that we had more time before reinforcements showed up." He threw Onyx a look and let out a sigh, the white flag. Rome stood up, using Ethan as a foundation to push off and shoving one last victory down his throat. Onyx was much kinder as he released Dylan from his hold, loosening his grip on one hand but first to allow the boy to catch himself before splashing into the puddle. He backed away from the mud puddle and adjusted his large hood to make sure his long locks stayed dry. The landscape around them was empty. Rome quickly confirmed that Liam was missing as Onyx pointed to the tower. From their standpoint, it was hard to see if the cousins' fight reached the top floor, but the rain brought down the sound of a scuffle. They hurried toward the entrance, Rome's eyes never leaving the top in case his friend or more falling rocks appeared. "You weren't up there, were you?" he asked Onyx suddenly, remembering the face that he had seen. Onyx stopped in the doorway and gave him a quizzical look while the light was on his face. Rome took one look at his friend and knew that it was impossible. "Sorry," he said, shaking his head. "I thought I saw you up there. It was probably just Goose under that hood." Onyx shrugged and led them inside. The entrance room was small and cramped with a fire pit surrounded by a stack of bedrolls and crates. To their right, the stairs lined the outside wall of the tower, curving up into the dark hall. Muffled grunts and thuds echoed down from the floor above. Knowing Liam was at the top, Rome nudged his way past Onyx and raced up the stairs. Each step was shallower than he expected, and some he quickly realized were unstable. He reached the second level in a few hasty breaths. The floor was empty, with a large gaping hole in the center. Rome teetered around the edge and crossed to the next set of stairs. Lengthening his stride to climb even quicker, he found Goose and Liam squaring off. Liam's chin was bruised and bloodied from a cut lip, but he had managed to land a solid hit on Goose's pride. "Looks like we're the last ones, Lee," Goose sneered. He tweaked his nose with his thumb and forefinger, taking a long, loud sniff to keep the blood in. "You sure you want them to watch you lose again?" Liam shifted his weight and went on the attack, arms out, ready to grapple. Goose absorbed his charge, flipping him onto his back without breaking stride. Air burst out of Liam's chest, sending a splatter of blood with it. Rome took another step, but Liam shouted, "Don't!" He rolled over and stood up, keeping his eyes on Goose, who didn't want to pursue. The opportunity for an attack. "This is my fight." "It's gotta be a complete victory if you want the tower. You lose, and you're all out. Just stop playing around and fight me like you mean it." Goose kept his hands in his pockets, his body unguarded and wide open for another attack. It was another ploy to draw Liam in and humiliate him. Rome saw it, and from the look on Liam's face, he knew it too. He took the bait anyway. Goose baited aside the punch that was directed at his face and slammed his forearm into Liam's collar. When the counterattack should have driven Liam into the wall, he snapped back, bringing his knee up against his cousin's arm. The strike wasn't enough to break it, but it was enough to throw him off guard. Liam didn't hesitate. He hefted Goose over his shoulder, flipping him onto the hard floor, and then followed up with another swift punch to his giant nose. This time, it was definitely broken. "All right, stop!" Goose raised his hands defensively to keep Liam's threats at bay. "Say it." Liam kept his fist drawn back while his knee pinned his cousin down. "That's 3 wins." "I forsake my claim to the orphan. It's yours." His modified version of the exchange script was enough to take the tension out of Liam's shoulders. He stared at his older cousin a while longer and let the words sink in. "You didn't even want it anymore, did you?" "Nah, the place is falling apart. Besides, I found a warmer bed on the lane," Goose replied, with a shameless grin and wink. Liam's nose wrinkled. "Then why not leave it?" "You still had to earn it." It's tradition. Goose extended his open hand to his cousin, who initially refused to take it. It's not over till you seal the deal, he said after a moment hung between them. Liam huffed and clasped Goose's forearm as he helped him to his feet. The fourth's promise to brotherhood. Get out of here, Liam said, holding back a smile and cocking his head to the exit. Goose clapped him on the back and excused himself, clutching his bloody nose as if the thing would fall off. Liam started to chuckle, then winced, and then immediately shivered. Damn, it's cold, he said, cringing at the gust of wind which blew through the open section of the wall. That's going to be your first announcement. Shut up and give me your knife. Rome pulled his father's hunting knife out of his belt and handed the hilt to his friend. The southeast side was crumbled down to the wooden support frame, leaving a fraction of the roof and the lower wall intact. Most of the rain rolled off the edge, except for the small waterfall that was now drenching the open wall and pooling on the floor. Liam turned in the opposite direction and went to the northwest corner, staying as far from the draft as possible. The support beam was already covered in nicks and scratches where previous winners had staked their claim. Liam jammed the knife into the wood and wrenched the blade down, cutting through the worn names below and carving a large L. A strong gust of wind tore into the tower, spraying them with rainwater. Liam cursed, yanked out the knife, and retreated to the staircase. Is that it? Rome asked. I'll finish it later. He escaped into the howling staircase, grumbling about his wet clothes along the way. Once Onyx and Rome caught up to him, he was standing on a step, looking through a hole in the wall where bricks had fallen away. This place needs a lot of work, he said as he tested the sturdiness of the gap. Yeah. You're just now realizing that? Rome asked. No. But did you have to break the front door, too?